In the heart of the New Mexico Territory, 1875, the sun bled red across the horizon, staining the desert sky like a wound that refused to close. A lone rider moved through the dust like a shadow on horseback, his silhouette cutting against the dying light. His name was Elias Graves, a cowboy whose silence spoke louder than most men's bullets. That evening, while the world prepared to rest, fate led him to something no man expected to find in Apache country: two young girls tied to a wagon wheel, their wrists bound, eyes wide with terror, as three drunken bandits circled them like vultures. One trigger pull could have ended everything right there. Instead, that moment began a story the West would whisper about for decades. Because what happened the next day was something no cowboy could ever prepare for. They say every good deed in the West carried a shadow, and Elias was about to meet his. He didn't know it yet, but by dawn, a figure would ride into his camp, a woman cloaked in Apache paint and silence, bringing with her a reward so strange, it would challenge everything he thought he knew about trust, loyalty, and the thin line between gratitude and vengeance. Elias Graves wasn't the kind of man who chased trouble. He was a drifting soul, a former Union scout turned cowboy for hire, wandering the frontier with no attachments, no plans, and no one to answer to. He rode where the wind carried him, traded work for whiskey, and trusted no one but his horse, Ashen. That autumn evening, the desert stretched out before him in an endless wave of silence. The only sounds were the distant call of coyotes and the slow creak of his saddle. He was 3 days out from Fort Stanton, heading nowhere in particular, when something cut through the stillness, a sound faint but sharp. A scream. It rode the wind like a warning. He pulled his horse to a stop. Another cry followed, closer this time. High-pitched. Panicked. Young. Elias turned Ashen toward the canyon ridge. Down below, half hidden by sagebrush and broken rock, sat a wagon with a shattered wheel. A dying campfire threw just enough light to reveal three silhouettes moving like hyenas around something tied up. He reached for his spyglass and what he saw made his blood run cold. Two Apache girls, no older than 11, were bound at the wrists, their faces streaked with dirt and fear. The men circling them weren't Apache. They were white drifters, the kind of scavengers who prowled the edges of law and morality, preying on the vulnerable. Elias exhaled slowly. He'd seen enough during the war to know how scenes like this ended when men turned their backs. Against the whisper of caution echoing in his mind, he loosened the strap on his Colt .45. The bandits were too drunk to notice the lone figure descending from the ridge. Elias rode in silence, letting Ashen's hooves sink softly into the sand. 20 yards out. "Let them go," he ordered. The men froze, their heads snapping toward him. One with a rusted revolver spat into the fire. "Ain't your business, cowboy. Best keep ridin'." Elias didn't move. His silhouette against the blood-red sky made him look like something out of a nightmare. Another man laughed and sneered, "Look at him. Thinks he's John Wesley Hardin." But their arrogance was their mistake. Before they could draw, Elias moved. 2 gunshots cracked through the night like thunder. 2 men fell before their fingers even brushed the triggers. The third turned to flee, but Elias swung his rifle from the saddle and fired once. The man collapsed face first into the sand, his revolver skidding uselessly away. The echo of gunfire rolled down the canyon, a warning whispered into the night. Elias dismounted, his boots crunching over gravel as he approached the girls. Their wide, terrified eyes followed his every step. He crouched and cut their ropes carefully, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now," he told them. But they didn't move toward him. They whispered to each other in Apache, words he didn't understand, but fear has a universal sound. He offered them water, wrapped them in a spare blanket, and rebuilt the fire. Night settled deeper over the desert, stars spilling across the sky like ancient eyes watching from above. For the first time in years, Elias wasn't riding alone. He didn't know their names. They didn't know his. But under that vast western sky, they shared the same fire and the same uncertain dawn. Dawn crept over the desert like a slow-burning fuse, painting the world in gold and ash. Elias rose early, as he always did, with the quiet discipline of a man who had learned to survive on instinct. The two girls still huddled near the fire, wrapped in his blanket. They hadn't slept much. He hadn't either. Something about the way they stared into the flames, not with relief, but with a heavy, knowing silence, unnerved him. They were safe, but their eyes told him the story wasn't over. Elias brewed a pot of coffee, the scent drifting on the cool morning air. He offered the girls dried bread and water. They accepted cautiously, whispering to each other between every small movement. He didn't speak their language, but he recognized fear, and something else. Expectation. It was as if they were waiting for something, or someone. He glanced toward the horizon. Apache land stretched beyond the ridge. He knew the dangers of lingering there. This territory wasn't kind to strangers, and the Apaches were known to track swiftly and silently. If the girls belonged to a nearby band, someone would be looking for them. And if that someone found a white man traveling alone with two of their children, the misunderstanding could turn fatal fast. Elias decided to ride out by midday, heading toward the nearest trading post, where he could leave the girls safely. It wasn't his. By late morning, the desert wind shifted. It came low and warm, carrying with it a sound so subtle that only a scout's ear could catch it, the distant rhythmic thump of hooves. He froze, listening. There it was again, closer this time. A single rider. The girls noticed it too. Their whispering stopped. One of them stood and shaded her eyes, staring toward the shimmering horizon. Her lips parted in a single, trembling word he didn't understand. But her tone said it all. Someone was coming. Elias moved to the edge of the camp, rifle in hand, eyes narrowing as a figure emerged from the heat haze. A woman. She rode with the posture of someone born to the saddle, her face marked with the deep red and black paint of Apache custom. Around her neck hung bone charms and turquoise beads that caught the light as she approached. Her presence was commanding, silent, and deliberate. When she dismounted, the air itself seemed to still. The girls ran to her, wrapping their arms around her waist with a mix of relief and reverence. She rested her hands gently on their heads, murmuring soft words in their language. Her gaze, however, never left Elias. She stepped forward slowly. Her eyes were dark and sharp, the kind that saw through lies before they were spoken. She pointed toward the dead bandits lying cold in the sand beyond the ridge, then back to her daughters. She understood what he had done. But there was no smile. No nod of gratitude. Just a measured silence that pressed on him heavier than any thank you could. Elias lowered his rifle, unsure of what to expect. She reached into the leather satchel slung across her horse and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in animal hide. She held it between her palms as if it were something sacred, then extended it toward him. He hesitated. "I don't need payment," he said gruffly. She didn't understand his words, but his tone was clear. Still, she pressed the bundle into his hands with quiet insistence. Her daughters watched intently, their faces a mixture of gratitude and something Elias couldn't quite name, something heavier. He unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a beautifully crafted necklace made of carved bone, turquoise, and what looked like an eagle's claw polished smooth by time. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, primitive yet regal, like a relic that carried stories older than the land itself. Elias looked up at her, confused. "Why give me this?" he muttered under his breath. The woman placed a hand over her heart, then pointed at him. Then she raised her hand toward the sky, palm open. It was a gesture he didn't understand fully, but it carried weight. Almost ceremonial. She spoke a few words in Apache, her voice low and melodic. Though he couldn't grasp their meaning, they lingered in the air like a prophecy. Then, without another glance back, she mounted her horse, lifted the girls onto it, and rode off into the horizon. Elias stood there for a long moment, the necklace dangling from his fingers, the desert wind swirling dust around his boots. He had expected thanks. Maybe gold. Maybe nothing at all. But this? This was something different. Something he couldn't name. That night, as he camped alone once again, he studied the necklace in the flickering firelight. Every curve, every bead seemed deliberate, telling a story he couldn't yet read. The eagle claw glinted like a sliver of the moon. He didn't know it, but that strange reward would soon change the course of his journey, and his soul, in ways he could never have imagined. The following days stretched out beneath a merciless sun. Elias rode on, the necklace tucked carefully into his saddlebag, though he didn't quite know why he kept it. Something about it unsettled him. It wasn't just jewelry, it felt alive, like it carried a weight that wasn't entirely his. At night, when the desert went quiet and the stars burned cold, he'd take it out and study it by the firelight. The eagle claw caught the flame in strange ways, glinting as if it held secrets. On the third day, as he followed the old trading route through a narrow canyon, a sudden stillness fell over the land. The usual chorus of cicadas and distant coyotes was gone. Even ashen shifted uneasily beneath him. Elias's instincts, sharpened by years of war and wandering, flared like a warning bell. He reined in the horse, scanning the cliffs above. That was when he saw them. On the third day, as he followed the old trading route through a narrow canyon, a sudden stillness fell over the land. The usual chorus of cicadas and distant coyotes was gone. Even ashen shifted uneasily beneath him. Elias's instincts, sharpened by years of war and wandering, flared like a warning bell. He reined in the horse, scanning the cliffs above. That was when he saw them. Figures. Shadows moving along the ridges. Apache riders. At least half a dozen. Silent, disciplined, and watching him like hawks. Elias knew enough to understand the danger. A lone cowboy riding through their land, wearing no tribal markings, could be mistaken for a trespasser, or worse. He considered turning back, but before he could act, a sharp whistle echoed through the canyon. In an instant, the riders descended like a tide of ghosts. They surrounded him in a tight circle, spears and rifles raised, horses stamping the ground in perfect rhythm. Elias kept his hands visible, his heart steady but pounding. He knew that one wrong move here meant death. The leader emerged from the group, a broad-shouldered man with braids bound in leather and eyes like obsidian. His face was painted with black streaks that gave him the look of a warrior born for silence and precision. He spoke in Apache, his voice deep and commanding. Elias didn't understand the words, but he understood the question behind them: who are you, and why are you here? Elias opened his mouth, but no explanation would bridge this gap. Then, almost without thinking, he reached slowly into his saddlebag and pulled out the necklace. He held it up high, letting the sun strike the eagle claw. The reaction was immediate. The riders murmured among themselves. The leader's eyes widened for the briefest moment, then hardened again, though the spear in his hand lowered slightly. He barked another command. Two men dismounted and approached Elias, taking the necklace from his hand and bringing it to the leader. The man held it reverently, turning it over in his palms. He spoke rapidly to his men, and their tone shifted, from hostility to something more cautious, almost respectful. He looked back at Elias and pointed to the necklace, then to himself, then to the sky, repeating a word Elias didn't know but could feel: honor, destiny, bond. Without warning, the leader dismounted and approached Elias face to face. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the man reached out and pressed the necklace against Elias's chest with a firm, deliberate hand, locking eyes with him. It wasn't a gesture of return. It was a gesture of recognition. Elias realized then that what the mother had given him wasn't just a token of gratitude. It was a mark. A symbol recognized by the tribe, perhaps even a sacred talisman. By accepting it, he had unknowingly accepted something greater, a bond of protection, or perhaps a role in a story far older than his own. The Apache riders stepped back, forming a silent escort around him. They didn't speak, but their spears lowered. The leader raised his hand and gave a sharp whistle. The group turned their horses and guided Elias out of the canyon, not as a prisoner, but as a guest. By the time they parted ways, Elias understood the magnitude of what had happened. He had saved 2 girls out of instinct, never expecting anything in return. But in a land where trust was rare and blood feuds ran deep, that single act had carved his name into a story that would outlive him. That night, camped by a small creek beneath a sky that seemed endless, Elias sat alone with the necklace in his hands. He thought of the woman's silent gaze, of the daughter's fearful eyes, of the warrior's respect. He realized something he had spent years avoiding. In the lawless expanse of the West, every action echoed louder than a gunshot. Some echoes faded into the sand, others became legend. He hung the necklace around his neck, feeling its weight settle against his chest, not as a burden, but as a reminder. Out here, where justice was a coin flipped by the wind, doing the right thing didn't always bring gold. Sometimes, it brought something far rarer, honor. Trust. A place in a story larger than oneself. And as the fire crackled low and the stars burned bright, Elias Graves understood a truth the West had been trying to teach him all along: a single choice, made in silence, can ripple through the hearts of people you may never fully know. In a land of gunpowder and shadows, that was how legends were born.